video, we will discuss 5 secrets of free-flowing loose watercolor. To illustrate my points, I will be painting this beautiful branch of Spirea japonica. While I wet my paper to prepare for painting, let's define what is loose style of watercolor painting. It of course depends on the personal style of each artist, but for me, painting loosely means that I let go of some of the control of paint and water. I let the pigments and the water flow on the surface of the paper and mix freely, and I'm hoping for good results, which sometimes don't happen, but also things happen during painting loosely that are impossible to achieve with careful, fully controlled paint application. The first secret that I discovered when practicing to paint loosely is that we need a fairly big sheet of paper to let the color float, and we need sufficiently big brush to hold enough paint and water to cover the surface of the painting. If you have a tiny sheet of paper, there will be no room for pigment and water to float and mix and create that magic that we call loose watercolor painting. This sheet I'm painting on is 12 by 16 inches, and I would say that's the minimum size that I will use for practicing loose painting. This is a Chinese goat hair brush, so I can't really tell you the size. I don't know what number it is, but you can see it's fairly large. So if you have a tiny little brush, just a few hairs, if you try to cover a large area, you will get streaks because you will see the brush strokes and there will not be enough water to blend them together. A small brush with small amounts of water and pigment are great for details because the brush strokes will be very defined. My second suggestion would be to use lots of pigment. You will see that wells on my watercolor palette are almost full with different colors, so I can pick up enough pigment with my brush. I sometimes use ceramic cups where I pre-mix different washes for my painting, so I don't waste time trying to pick up the pigment while my painting dries, while I don't want it to dry, while I'm trying to mix colors on paper. I also spritz my colors from the spray bottle before I start painting to reactivate the watercolor and soften it. And also keep in mind that watercolor lightens at least 2 shades when it dries, so even though right now your colors, while they're wet, they look very bright and saturated, they will lighten, so you really need a lot of pigment to achieve the intensity of color. And if you start adding layers of color, if you don't get enough pigment with the first application, those subsequent layers will reduce the transparency of color and the white paper will not shine through quite as much. The colors will become more opaque and dense. So lots of pigment at the first application is very important. I also wanted to mention that for loose painting, usually not making a pencil drawing or just drawing a few guidelines with a pencil really helps with looseness and freedom of your painting. You kind of remove those pencil boundaries that they can hold you. As you can tell, the leaves that I'm painting are probably not going to be in the same spots where they are on the reference photo, but that's why it's a reference photo. I'm not trying to exactly copy it. I'm not a copy machine, so I'm painting my understanding and my impression of this photo. And you might ask, what if I'm painting a portrait and I need to catch the likeness? Then of course pencil drawing will be necessary for the face, but you can still have some looseness in the background, maybe in the clothing, and just in the general style of your painting. The third thing that I noticed trying to paint loosely and with more freedom is that you have to have freedom of movement. I usually stand up when I'm painting. That allows me to move around, step away from my painting. It allows my arm to move freely, and subsequently my painting style becomes more free-flowing and loose. If you have to be seated when you're painting, try to have your painting a little ways away from your eyes so you can see the whole sheet of paper, and try not to lean on your arm because obviously that will restrict the movement of your arm and it will be harder for you to freely move your brush. Whenever you make a pause in your painting or you have to wait for the paint to dry, you could move the painting away and kind of look at it from a distance and evaluate the results, and that will also stop you from overworking the painting and help preserve its freshness and looseness of the style. Next thing I want to discuss is variety of edges. Even though when we think about loose watercolor, we always think about those soft edges when everything kind of blends and flows together. But for visual interest, we do need to have both soft and hard edges. I think for successful paintings, we need to find a few hard edges in our painting. So that's what I'm doing now. I waited for that first free-flowing layer to dry, and then I'm adding just a few details. Very important not to add too many, but just a few details to have a variety of edges. Piece of advice I have is importance of the variety of texture. Watercolor is a magic medium. You probably heard about granulating colors. You can see in the upper right corner I used ultramarine purple, which is a very granulating color, so I have some texture there which adds visual interest to my painting. But also I can use other techniques like splattering, which I'm doing now, and you can use hard edge splatters when you just shake your brush and leave those droplets alone, or you can soften those splatters. I can spritz them with a little water from my spray bottle that will soften the edges, again giving me even more variety. And I can also add texture with other materials like pencils, pastels, and in this case I'm using white gouache that looks different from watercolor and again brings more visual interest to the painting. You can also use other things like salt, texturing medium, splatterable alcohol. So lots of possibilities to achieve that variety of texture and visual interest in your watercolor painting. The essence of loose painting is that you work quickly. This final work that you see took me maybe an hour at the most, so that's why I was able to also produce a second version of the same reference photo. You see it right now. In this one, I painted the background first, I let it dry, and then I painted the branch on top of it. The leaves did not come out as bright as in the first version, but I think it still looks pretty interesting. Not everything has to be super bright. I kind of like this subdued version as well, and I think background actually looks more interesting in this one. Please let me know in comments which version you like better, and also I'm curious to know what are your thoughts on loose style of watercolor painting. I'm looking forward to your comments. I read them all and respond to all of them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one here on Timer Up Studios channel.